Today's event is on the Affordable Homes Programme and the planning process. So this summer learning programme is brought to you by Homes England's new Local Government Capacity Centre, and this slide summarises who we are and what we do. And we've launched the session following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities need most support and how this can be best delivered. This summer learning programme is one of our first initiatives. We're a small team, we're starting small, but we've got more to come. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the agenda for today's session. I'll just run through this with you. So, as I said, I'm Victoria Keane, this is your welcome. In a moment, I'm going to pass over to Helen Fielding, who's going to introduce the learning session for you in more detail. Then we'll have Helen Bone, who's going to talk through the Homes England role. She's going to talk about the Affordable Homes Programme, and she'll give an overview to new government policy. We'll then hear from Steve Sheen, and he'll talk about delivering additional homes in your area. And then back to Helen Fielding, who'll talk about driving affordable housing growth. And we'll move on to Q&A. And so there's a number of children. And then we'll hear from you to get some of your feedback. If you haven't done, please, can you turn off your cameras and mute yourself? Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Helen Fielding. She's the Head of Growth in the Homes England Affordable Homes team. And before I do, just a quick reminder to everybody, please mute yourselves. Thank you very much.
Ian, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this local government capacity centre session. If everybody could just stick themselves on mute, that would be a fantastic start to the session. Thank you so much. So yeah, Vic's just introduced me. My name's Helen Fielding. I'm the Head of Growth. I look after affordable homes business in the North. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues from the Affordable Housing Growth team, Steve Sheen and Helen Bone, who are going to be taking you through some of the presentation this morning. So we're from the Affordable Housing Growth team. We're part of the Investment Directorate, and it's our job to drive new business through the affordable homes programmes that are managed and delivered by Homes England on behalf of government. We've got a regional focus, so we organise and distribute ourselves across 4 regionally based hubs. So there will be a growth manager near you if you want to follow up and discuss more and better affordable housing. So as I said, I'm really pleased to see so many people on the call today. And this is just the first of a series of engagement sessions that we're planning to help shape our affordable housing delivery with partners in places. So Steve and Helen are going to give you a bit of an overview about us, who we are, what we do, and what we're hoping to achieve. We'll give you a bit of detail about the 2021-26 Affordable Homes Programme, which is a great opportunity to deploy real cash into the market to deliver more and better homes in the right place where people need them. And we're going to try and address a bit of a thorny issue that we've come up against over and again over the years, which is how to align the Affordable Homes Programme with the planning process. We see huge potential for delivering additional affordable homes on market-led sites, especially in the currently really kind of hot land market across the country. But we're aware that this can be a source of confusion and difficulty for our partners, because fundamentally we need to make sure, don't we, that the public money that we invest is not paying for things that developer contributions should pay for. So it's a great opportunity to diversify tenure and improve community mix, but we also need to demystify with you guys how our grant funding can sit alongside and not duplicate those planning obligations that you'll be negotiating with developers every day. So that's what this is all about today. And fundamentally, we also want to start a conversation with you about how we can work together to deliver more and better homes in the right place, and get your ideas on how we can work together better in the future to drive that really significant agenda for us, which is affordable homes delivery. So I'm going to hand you over to Helen now, heard on the screen, who's going to talk a bit more about our work in the Affordable Growth team and how we contribute to the wider Homes England mission. Over to you, Helen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Helen. Can I have the next slide, please, Steve? So I've got a couple of slides more generally about the role of Homes England, and then I'm going to be talking through the Affordable Homes Programme. And as Helen said, Steve will then focus more on the planning in relation to the Affordable Housing Grant. So for those who don't know, Homes England was launched in January 2018 to play a major role in fixing the housing market. So we are sponsored by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and our mission is to intervene in the market to ensure more homes are built in areas of greatest need. We've got a real focus on improving affordability and creating a more resilient and diverse housing market. We have a strategic plan, so if you want to know more, please do search for that. Steve, next slide, please. So what do? We use our land, money and expertise to accelerate delivery, tackle market failure and help shape a more resilient and diverse housing market. So specifically in relation to land, we acquire public and private sites and we bring them forward to the market. We have a hugely broad range of investment products, including debt funding for infrastructure, grant for affordable housing, which we'll be talking about today, equity and financial guarantees. And we also partner with private lenders. I always feel this is a part of Homes England that actually people perhaps know less about and we need to shout more about. And we use our networks and expertise to help build partnerships and address local housing challenges, leaning into local authorities such as yours to work out how we can do more in your place. And finally, we're helping to support improvements in construction productivity and design quality, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that later. Next slide, please. So what we're here to do today is to talk about the Affordable Homes Programme, which we've recently launched 2021 to 2026. It's our newest investment product, and in fact the first fund we've launched as the new agency. So this grant funding programme is for delivering of additional affordable homes over and above those that are delivered through the planning system, and there'll be more on that later from Steve. And just worth remembering in relation to the previous slide that this fund sits alongside a broad range of tools and funding streams that we have at our disposal to work with you to bring forward more homes and more affordable homes. So our funding and support is available for all organisations with an interest in developing affordable housing. At the bottom of this slide there's a list. This includes housing associations or registered providers as we call them, local authorities, developers, institutional investors, for-profit registered providers, community-led organisations and others. So from very small organisations to very large institutions. Next slide, please, Steve. So what will the fund deliver? Well, we have £7.4 billion made available for the delivery of up to £130,000. It's the biggest settlement we've received, and that covers all of England outside of London, which is covered by the LGA. So the funding is split between Homes for Rent, which we anticipate will be around half of the programme. And under Homes for Rent, we include both social rent and affordable rent, and affordable rent being anything up to 80% of market rent. It's worth noting in relation to Homes for Rent that we do require an organisation applying for a grant to be registered with the regulator of social housing. And then the other half of the fund will focus on routes into home ownership. So that's shared ownership, home ownership for people with long-term disabilities, older person shared ownership and rent to buy. And within this slide, there's some comments here about the new shared ownership model and right to shared ownership. And I'll be coming on to that in a slide a little bit further along. Just a final point on this slide to note that where in the past we might have had separate funding programs for different types of housing, within the Affordable Homes Programme we can fund a broad range of different kinds of housing, including specialist and supported housing, rural and community-led housing, traveller pitches and empty homes. Next slide please, Steve. So there are two routes really through which partners can access our funding, and these are set out. I'm not going to go through all the detail on this slide, but just the headlines really that are important. We have the route which is continuous market engagement, CME, and this really suits our providers who want to come into us on a scheme by scheme basis as long as funding is available. It really suits our small and medium registered providers, really suits new entrants and partners whom we haven't worked with before, and is really good for those specialist and supported housing schemes that are often complex and require a lot of work from partners and ourselves to get over the line. So on the other side of the slide, we talk about our multi-year strategic partnership deals. So this funding is accessed through a different route for partners who have more ambitious programs and can deliver more at scale. So it provides partners with long-term funding certainty over several years. It gives partners access to our wider non-grant funded support, as highlighted earlier, and it increases flexibility. So for example, a strategic partner can determine their tenure on the completion of homes rather than upfront. So to date, our strategic partnership deals have predominantly worked with large providers to deliver at scale. However, in this next funding round, 21 to 26, we will be extending the route to more partners where this could help to unlock their ambition. Next slide, please, Steve. Just a quick one on key dates. As you'll see from the slides, we are already open for business. We've got bids on the system, we've assessed bids, we've allocated bids, and we're getting into contract with our partners. Schemes must start on site by September 2025, and schemes must complete by 2026 March. And what you'll see there is our strategic partnership bidding round has closed. That closed in May. We're hoping to make announcements in the summer for delivery to start in the autumn, and homes must start by March 2026 and complete by March 28, with some strategic partners having longer term funding to 2029. Next slide, please. So just a couple of items on wider objectives. We are really looking to focus our investment on MMC. I've got one final slide on that later. The National Design Guide will be encouraging the uptake and improving energy efficiency and sustainability of homes, and the use of SME contractors. Next slide, please. So just a couple on this slide around MMC. We are expecting a significant number of homes to be delivered using MMC. This is really exciting for us. It means 25% of the strategic partnership delivery must be MMC. And on the right hand side of this slide, we've just included some examples of how we can support MMC. So we are driving MMC on our own sites, and we can provide loan and equity finance towards MMC providers. Next slide, please. So penultimate slide from me, which is just to highlight the changing government policy landscape. So we've got some new policies that have just landed and others that are emerging. I think the most critical one for us in the new programme is the new model for shared ownership, which reduces the first tranche sale to 10%, allows for much more gradual staircasing, and introduces a 10-year period for new shared owners where the landlord will cover the cost of repairs. More detail available through the link in the presentation. And finally, the right to shared ownership. So for rented homes funded through the new programme, in most cases, a tenant will be able to buy between 10 and 75% where they can afford to do so, and eventually staircase out to full ownership. There are some exemptions, so again, it's worth checking the link to see what those exemptions are. And finally, there are other emerging policies: planning reform, first homes, building safety, environmental sustainability, and we will expect our partners to consider those new policy implications when they're bidding into us. And so final slide for me, Steve. So the final question, and Helen has already highlighted this, is there anything we can do differently? So I'm just going to pause here and say that we really are inviting our partners to have those conversations with us in the growth team to see how can we use this fantastic opportunity we have for funding up to 2028 and 2029 to deliver more additional homes in your local area. So I'm handing over to Steve now, and Steve's going to get into a bit more of the detail about how our Affordable Homes programme sits alongside the planning system and the planning process. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Helen. Good morning, everyone. This is a question we're often asked around can Homes England provide grant funding for affordable homes in addition to those secured through the planning process? I suppose the simple answer is yes, and as an agency we're always looking at opportunities to increase the delivery of good quality affordable homes. However, the grant funding we offer is for additional affordable homes and shouldn't replace the financial obligations a developer must meet to deliver a planning policy compliant scheme. As Helen mentioned earlier, this can often be a complex issue, and although we won't get to cover every eventuality in the following slides, we can provide some clarity on the distinction between affordable homes secured through the planning process and how and when we can provide grant funding in addition to these. In order to do this, it's worth setting out some key principles which I've put on the screen here. These can act as a general rule of thumb when you're considering this approach to development in your areas. So on market-led schemes, Homes England can fund affordable homes, but they've got to be in addition to the home secured through planning game. The scheme viability must have been concluded, and the additional affordable homes must not be part of a Section 106 agreement, subject to a planning condition or a unilateral undertaking. I'll try to explain this in a little bit more detail and bring this to life on the following slides. So, if we consider a scheme where a developer brings forward a scheme of 100 homes, the local planning policy requires 30% of these homes to be affordable, a viability assessment is undertaken, negotiations complete between all parties, and the developer agrees to deliver 30% affordable homes to the tenure specified. So this is the ideal outcome, and all of these affordable homes are secured through a Section 106 planning condition or a unilateral undertaking. If you're supportive as a local authority, you've got a willing developer and a willing partner, Homes England can provide grant funding for additional affordable homes. These additional homes will go through our normal bidding assessment and approval process. So we'll have the 30% that you've got through the planning process. We can come in and, just for illustrative purposes, provide another 10% grant funded homes, and the remaining 60% will be delivered as market housing. As I just mentioned, the 10% is just for illustrative purposes only. These additional affordable homes can support your ambitions to deliver more of a particular type of product, such as shared ownership, where demand is high in a local area, or you want to diversify the housing market offer on top of what you've got through your planning process. The 10% grant funded homes are outside of the planning process and can't form part of any of the obligations. I think it's just important to bear that one in mind. But now we face the sort of reality. As we're all aware, there are often viability issues which will affect compliance with local planning policy, and this reduces the number of affordable homes you can secure on site through the planning process. As we can see in the examples shown, this is the reality in some cases, and you can often end up with no affordable homes being provided on site for a variety of reasons. If you find yourselves in this position and you've accepted the outcome of the viability assessment, but you still want to deliver affordable homes on site, Homes England can support you to do this with grant funding. So, as I've mentioned, if the viability and the reduction in affordable homes is accepted, we can provide funding for additional affordable housing on the site that's coming through. And again, just a reminder that any affordable homes that we grant fund in this way cannot form part of any of the planning obligations that we've just mentioned and must comply with our funding requirements. The partner delivering the affordable housing will be asked to confirm this, so they're usually au fait with all of the funding and the guidelines that we need to work through. As you will be aware, the negotiations around planning compliance will have assumed that any additional homes delivered in addition to the Section 106 would have been for market housing. This means that the cost of buying any additional affordable homes by a registered provider or a delivery partner will be based more often than not on open market value. So in this instance, we would expect the partner to secure a reasonable discount. We've used the 10% as an example, but again, this will be down to the appetite from the developer and the negotiating skills of the delivery partner. The discount will reflect potential savings a developer will make through the bulk purchase, such as guaranteed sales without incentives, de-risking the reliance on individual sales and the associated marketing that goes with this, beneficial cash flow through an agreed development agreement with stage payments, or an off-the-shelf deal where a big chunk of the purchase is paid once contracts are exchanged. This list isn't exhaustive, and each of the negotiations will be unique to the site in question. So far we've looked at a relatively straightforward site delivered in one phase. On larger sites, there will inevitably be multiple phases in the development over a longer period. So it's essential that the same principles that we touched on in the first slide that I covered apply in terms of viability, and any grant funded homes do not offset the developer's obligation to provide affordable homes as agreed in the planning obligations or conditions. So on this example, we've used a 10% again for illustrative purposes, and if all parties are in agreement, we can support the increase with grant funding. Again, these affordable homes secured through the planning process will be covered by Section 106, planning condition or unilateral undertaking, but the additional grant funded homes must be outside of this and comply with our funding requirements. I know it sounds a bit like a broken record, but this is the point that we're just trying to sort of clarify, because it's just got lost in translation on some areas. There are several scenarios where a Section 106 can potentially be used alongside grant funding, but if you or your partners are in any doubt, please come and talk to us. As Helen mentioned before, there's a growth manager near you, and we're more than willing to sort of go through and the general principles of how this is brought forward. Again, these won't cover every specific case, but it does give you an idea of when this could happen. The first example is where only land is captured within a Section 106. These are usually service plots gifted or transferred at a reduced value to an organisation, usually a registered provider. It's worth noting that this isn't an opportunity for the developer to provide a cheap alternative. The land or service plots will be equivalent to the developer's contribution. So the obligation is for the land in the Section 106. We can provide grant funding on top of that. The rest of the market housing is delivered as normal. And again, just as the Section 106 only covers the land, we can grant fund the construction of the affordable homes only. The second example is where the whole scheme is delivered as affordable housing. As there is no market housing to generate a developer contribution for affordable housing, all of these homes can be grant funded. This second option is usually a land-led scheme by a registered provider brought forward by them. And in this instance, you as the local planning authority may wish to secure the planning policy element of the scheme, just in case the registered provider sells on the site. We've been approached by a couple of planning authorities who've wanted to do this, and just as long as we understand the reasoning and the rationale behind, that is a possibility. So this is possible as long as the Section 106 does not contain anything that contradicts our funding conditions and is not part of a wider development, which I will cover in the next slide. So we've been presented with schemes that on the face of it, like on the previous slide, appear to deliver a fully affordable scheme with no restrictions and does not contradict our funding conditions as shown in example 2 on the previous slide. As there appears to be no market housing to generate a developer contribution for affordable homes, we would look to provide grant funding for all of them. However, when we receive the plans for the site, it's very clear that this is the first phase of a wider market-led development, which has an agreed Section 106 to deliver 30% affordable homes across the whole site. So it appears that the developer is trying to offset their planning obligations on this scheme and future phases. So this means that the scheme that we originally looked at, we can't provide grant funding on because they are not providing additional affordable homes to the planning process. There's only 10% that would fall into that sort of remit. So as an agency, we must ensure that our investment in affordable housing through grant funding is not supplementing a developer's financial obligations through the planning process or artificially inflating land values. The third example is where the use of a Section 106 alongside grant funding is possible on rural exception sites. The rural exception sites are usually small sites where the settlements have a population of less than 3,000. The MPPF states that local planning authorities should support opportunities to bring forward rural exception sites for affordable housing to meet local identified need, and consider if allowing some market housing would help facilitate this. In the first example, we have a fully affordable scheme, and all 12 homes can be included within the Section 106 because this is a rural exception site and the homes must remain affordable in perpetuity to meet the local housing need. As there's no market housing to cross-subsidise the affordable homes, we can provide grant funding for all of them. In this second example, there's a need to introduce some market housing to support the delivery of the affordable homes. The Section 106 in this case will include all the affordable homes because this is a rural exception site and again must remain affordable in perpetuity to meet local housing need. Because there's market housing been introduced on the site, we will need to see the viability report to see what extent the market housing is subsidising the affordable homes and how much grant is required, if any. So on rural exception sites, we do allow local connection for shared ownership. Staircasing is restricted to 80% and rented homes are exempt from right to acquire and the right to shared ownership. This final slide provides some examples of obligations or restrictions that make a development or may make a development ineligible for grant funding. As I mentioned earlier, this list isn't exhaustive, so if you're in any doubt, please come and talk to us and we'll be more than willing to work with you on the general principles of what you're trying to bring forward. I've included a link at the end of this slide to the capital funding guide I've referred to throughout the presentation. And if you get a chance, please take a look through the relevant sections, as this is a really useful first point of reference. I'm going to now hand you back to Helen, who's going to conclude the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Great. I think Steve's learned some valuable lessons as part of this, which is to use a bit less animation in his slide decks in future, but it is great. Well done. So there was a lot there, wasn't there? A lot of detail, and I hope you found it interesting. And as I said earlier, kind of thorny issue around the interface between our grant funding and our kind of objectives and the planning process is just one of those issues that people have asked us to clarify. And we know that there will be lots and lots of other issues, and we are planning this kind of ongoing programme of engagement both with local authorities and our partners in the RP sector and the investment and development sector to kind of explain more about our programmes and how we can access them. So I've been sort of busily trying to answer some of the questions in the chat as we've gone along, but now it's your opportunity to post in the chat, to ask any questions that you have, make any comments or observations about what you've heard today, and crucially to get your ideas then about how we can work together in the future and what opportunities we have to kind of engage even better to drive more affordable housing. So thanks very much for listening. I think I'm chairing this next bit, aren't I, Amber? Are there any? Yeah, I'm just checking. So I'll go back through the questions and perhaps review the ones that we've done. So Carolyn said, oh, let's go back a bit further. Carolyn said, are the strategic and I explained that actually no. In the most recent iteration of our strategic partnership offer, which concluded last month, we did for the first time open the opportunity up to local authorities. And the wider sector, so unregistered bodies can have the opportunity to access the strategic partnership. And then the question was, what's your typical level of grant? And that's a question we get asked all the time, isn't it, Helen and Steve? And we don't use set grant rates. We do look at things on a scheme by scheme basis. And with this additional housing on market sites issue, we do acknowledge that this is an approach that can work really, really well in some areas, but in some areas where values are very high and rents are perhaps not commensurately high, it can be difficult for us to plug the gap between what a developer needs to achieve the open market value and what we're able to support our partners to deliver on what we can put in grants. So it's not a solution that works perfectly everywhere. We do acknowledge that. And then the question about, can you capture the grant funded stuff in a 106? And I think we've been clear, haven't we, Steve, that actually no, the Section 106 can only capture those homes that are being secured by developer contribution. And then the question is about, can we pay more to support MMC and energy efficiency measures? And the answer to that one is potentially, yes, subject to business case. And I'm just going to have another look. Do we have any examples, Section 106, where to cover 100% affordable housing with default policy planning obligation, should the scheme not go ahead as 100% affordable? And we do acknowledge that that is a risk authorities need to manage. The fact if you gave a permission that was unfettered by the requirement to provide affordable housing, and then the developer or the housing association decided to sell it on the open market, you need to kind of have that provision to preserve your policy position in the event that the site is sold. So we do have a standard paragraph that we do use to, in very simple terms, reflect that, which we'd be happy to share. The next question, are we able to apply for subsidy for units being delivered to M43 that are part of the affordable housing obligations or part of additionality? Ideally, the former should be covered by the developer, but. So I think we do have this question around, can you fund the same unit but with enhanced features? And I think the answer to that one is that that would be really tricky for us to do, because we need to be able to really clearly demonstrate that developer contributions are captured and harvested and used to deliver those numbers. So it's very difficult for us to double count units. But we would be interested in a conversation about that if there was a business case to support that. So I think that's probably one thing that we would be really interested to pick up with you within the local authority, to see if there was a way in which we could capture that developer contribution but actually provide something a bit different that your strategic housing plan demonstrated was needed. Thanks to Homes England and the local authority, we've been able to progress a community-led housing planning application for passive homes in Wiltshire. Thank you, Helen Bone. Helen, I don't know if you wanted to say something about that. Sounds like that's one of your babies.
Yes, it's great to see. I think it's the first community-led housing project in Wiltshire, and it's my experience that if we get one parish doing it, then hopefully other parishes will look at that and follow. So yes, looking forward to receiving an application from the Housing Association for capital grant for that scheme.
I'll read this one out in full. How do we deal with the position where Section 106 for a policy compliant 30% has been signed? However, subsequently it is agreed between the developer and the local planning authority, this isn't viable unless there's grant. If the Section 106 is varied to the 15%, say, the developer is unlikely to entertain a discussion about additionality. However, if the original Section 106 remains, it seems that grant funding can't be accessed. How can we maintain that 30%? And I think some of your assumptions are quite right, actually, because if it's not viable for you to deliver your 30% policy compliance, then it's going to be very difficult for you to require a landowner and a developer to commit to a legally binding document for them to do that. So I think in the question of that, it would be about negotiation and influencing and partnership development. And we'd be happy to get involved in those discussions to see how we can bring grant into the programme and give everybody what they want without anybody needing to take a financial hit on that. So another one of those kind of come and talk to us and see how we can help you conversations, I think. So I'm just moving to where sales on market sites are slow, there is an opportunity to purchase sold homes. However, the open market value of such are very high, where the local need is rent. Viability is really difficult to achieve. And yes, you're right, Rob, and I kind of acknowledge that in some very high value markets, it is difficult for us to plug that gap in the appraisal between the OMV and the capital rent, say, plus grant. But we have worked really positively across the country with developers and partners to broker deals where the advantage of having secured purchases, maybe limited kind of additionals being required, the way we pay our grant really helps with cash flow as well. We have been able to help partners negotiate significant discounts from developers. And we've also seen a new breed of developer housing association come into the market, delivering shared ownership products paying quite high percentages of open market values, even in higher value parts of the country. So, you know, we're not saying that this is a panacea, but there are opportunities for us to work really proactively as partners. Are there any restrictions in the terms of the grant to safeguard the affordable housing in the longer term? Actually, I'm doing all the talking here, so Helen or Steve, would one of you like to take that on and talk about the grant notification regime and the regulatory elements of our work? Just say if not, and I'll handle it.
I was just, yeah, I'll start really, and in particular in relation to the rural exception site, which really is a kind of exception in this regard. So just, I know Steve said this a number of times, but our grant funded homes being additional to those that are delivered through the planning process, then we can't, and you can't safeguard those within the Section 106 as affordable in perpetuity. So I think what's most hopeful there is presenting that in relation to, we see the affordability being in the grant as opposed to being in the home, and therefore within the latest regime of how housing associations operate, if they were to dispose of that affordable home, then the grant would have to be either returned to us or it would need to be recycled into delivering another affordable home. So the rural exception sites really are the exception to that, because we're only getting a planning permission on that site if those homes are meeting a local housing need, and they must remain affordable in perpetuity. So in that case, as Steve has mentioned, those homes do sit within the Section 106, and that is the exception for us.
Thank you, Helen. Wayne's asked, can a 100% local authority owned housing company rely on the RP status of the HRA to access grant? And the answer to that one, Wayne, is that the contracting entity, so if we were contracting for grant with the wholly owned company, it is that company that would have to have the RP status. If we were contracting with the local authority through its HRA, and then the local authority was passing on the management of those units, say, to a local housing company, that would be fine. Fundamentally, the contracting entity, which has to be the owner of the resulting affordable homes, needs to have registered status. And then interest then in this draft, a comment to say it was welcome to see these strategic partnerships open to local authorities, but the hurdle rates were too high for many to apply. Will this be lowered for local authorities in future programmes? And that's interesting feedback. Thank you for that. I mean, we are at the moment in assessment for the most recent strategic partnership opportunity, and we haven't got around to discussing with the department kind of what our future plans are going to be. But it was interesting. It's interesting to get that feedback. So thank you for that.
Just Helen, I would just add to that, because you know we did have that feedback from a number of local authorities who are really growing their ambition, but as yet can't really illustrate that pipeline. And again, as Helen said, then you know we're not sure about future conversations with the ministry, but certainly half of the fund is through continuous market engagement. So there's nothing to stop us from you know looking to fund your pipeline through the existing CME route, and so we would encourage local authorities to continue to talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Helen. I mean, we unashamedly targeted this strategic partnership opportunity at those organisations of scale with the really significant pipelines. But CME is far from, continuous market engagement is far from the poor relation. Continuous market engagement, as Helen said, is a really valuable way for us to support our partners to build their capacity, build their ambition and pipelines of supply. And that's why that's the main part of our job in terms of building those opportunities. Does the Homes England affordable home support also cover lifetime homes, special needs homes on an affordable basis? So those markets can have our support too. Steve, I don't know, would you like to have a go at answering David?
Yeah, no problem. I think Helen B touched on this before. I think 10% of the programme is for specialist and supported housing. We'd welcome bids to around the sort of supported housing world. We're doing quite a lot of work with local authorities and combined authorities to drive this forward and increase the delivery. So yeah, if you've got anything in mind that you'd like to discuss, even if it's just an idea or a concept, please come and talk to us, and we're more than willing to sort of bring this through the programme. We've got lots and lots of early interest that we're approving bids up and down the country, so, which is fantastic. But yeah, there's more money to come, so please come and talk to us.
And I think maybe I'll do a bit of a shameless plug for the Rough Sleepers accommodation programme that we're, sorry, forgive me. So we're working really closely with MHCLG to drive the RSAP programme. Some of your homelessness colleagues will be aware of this. So we're working really closely with the MHCLG advice team to drive the provision of more longer term move on homes for that cohort of rough sleepers that have been accommodated as a result of everyone in last year and continue to be impacted by the COVID pandemic. So just a bit of a shameless plug, if you're not aware or plugged into the RSAP opportunity, which brings both capital and revenue funding, please reach out to your homelessness leads to see how you might be able to help drive more business in your local authorities. So Jude is saying, on 100% affordable schemes, some planning authorities still want to have a Section 106 agreement in place to secure a percentage of those affordable homes. Is this really required? Would that mean that you wouldn't fund it? And the answer to that, and that's a popular question because that's had 5 thumbs up. So the answer to that, Jude, is that the considerations that we've been talking about apply to affordable homes that are delivered on market-led sites. Where it's an 100% affordable housing opportunity, we acknowledge that there is no market housing to provide across subsidy. The housing needs subsidy itself to be viable, and therefore it is possible to agree a Section 106 as long as it's absolutely clear that the purpose of Section 106 is not to harvest developer contribution, but is merely required to protect the local authority's planning policy position in perpetuity in the event that the site no longer becomes 100% affordable housing for whatever reason. So I hope that answers the question. If we can't capture the grant through the planning determination process, how can local planning authorities provide assurance to communities and local members that higher affordable housing can be delivered on large strategic sites where viability issues have resulted in the need to accept lower affordable housing contributions against the affordable housing policy position? And this is question there goes to the nub of the issue, really, doesn't it, Helen and Steve? Because this is kind of why we've come to this. Because the purpose of a Section 106 or other planning obligation is to capture a developer contribution. And if it isn't viable for that developer contribution to be captured, then our view is that it shouldn't be contained within a Section 106. Where I think we can provide assurances around that partnership development work that we've talked about. I don't know if you've had experience with this, haven't you, from your days in the local government family, about grappling with this conundrum. I don't know if you've got any comments to make.
Helen, was that?
Yeah.
Sorry, you broke out. Oh, Steve, yeah.
Steve, yeah. Or Helen, feel free to come in, guys.
Yeah, I'll go first, Helen, and if you want to dive in. Yeah, I think probably one of the key points of the presentation that we were trying to make is just to try to distinguish. We just wanted to keep the planning process to one side, and then where Homes England can come in and provide additional grant funding is kept separate. You can get to the same outcome on the site. So even if you've got a reduced level of viability and that's agreed and it's substantiated by a robust viability assessment, we can still come in and provide grant funding as long as it's an additional to whatever's captured in the planning process. So if your planning policy was 30% and viability is only saying you can deliver 10%, well, that'll be captured in your Section 106 or your planning condition or unilateral undertaking. We can still come in and provide additional grant funding. So you could get to 30%, but I think the point that we've just been trying to make, and that Helen's mentioned a couple of times, is that that's not captured within the planning process, because the planning process has determined that 10% is going to be delivered through the developer gain. We can provide additional affordable housing. Same outcome, same different types of tenure that you can provide, but just through a different route, and it's just kept quite clean on both sides.
Did you want to end, Helen?
I was just going to say, just recognizing really that that is a challenge for local authorities in their communication with communities, but that we do have to be really careful because we can't promise those additional affordable homes at certain points, and particularly when it's going through the planning process. So it is about that clear communication and best endeavours, as opposed to saying this is absolutely guaranteed. And as we know, some strategic sites can take a long time to come forward. We're in the position where we've got funding to 2026 and for some partners 2028, 29. But what we can't do is, and it wouldn't be right to, is to guarantee funding beyond the timescales that we have available. So again, that partnership development and working with local authorities and with communities and getting that communication clear is really, really critical.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Steve. So moving on now to Jenny's question. Do you know if the additional homes provided by Homes England count towards local authorities' affordable housing targets, or are they monitored separately? Gosh, that's testing my knowledge. It's a long time since I was in the local authority strategic housing team. I think we count them and we report them to government. And I'm aware that you guys do regular returns to the ministry as well. And I understand that there is a process in place to check the two things to avoid double counting. But it is kind of going a bit beyond my knowledge base, I'm afraid, to confirm that. But they do get counted, and for your own internal purposes, absolutely, there are affordable homes being delivered in your district or borough. Therefore, I imagine that you'll want to be telling your councillors and your communities about the progress that you've made in enabling and facilitating those. What can be done more long term to simplify the overall process to align grants and planning policy? And that's a really good question, because that's kind of what we're trying to start the conversation about today. We're really interested to hear your answers on that, or any ideas that people have. We understand that this is a thorny and complex area of work. We see great value and potential in delivering more affordable homes on market-led sites. But as I said at the beginning, and Steve has said, we need to be absolutely sure that public money is not being used to subsidise developer contributions that are reasonably and viably required by planning authorities. And the planning authorities that we speak to kind of, they would agree with our approach, because they'd see that, we don't want your grant funding undermining our policy position and our ability to deliver affordable homes through the planning process. So I'm sorry, I haven't really got an answer for you other than to say, let's keep talking. And if you've got any ideas about that, we'd be really, really interested to hear them. And unknown user is saying, we have noticed an increase in 100% affordable housing development proposals within our rural local authorities. We're unsure whether these developments would affect our community mix and related policies promoting mixed tenure. It would be interesting to know more about Homes England's opinions around 100% affordable housing developments in rural locations. And that's an interesting question, isn't it? And I wonder, Helen, can I maybe call on you to see what your initial response is to that?
Yeah, I just need 1 second to read it again.
It's about 100% affordable as a starting point.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because and I think it was during the year when we didn't have grant for affordable housing, the new planning policy changed, and we were able to do market housing on rural exception sites, for example. So I don't think we necessarily have a view about whether we'd rather see 100% or we're happy to see some market housing, for example, on rural sites. I think that's about us discussing with you as a local authority what your need is and what you want to see delivered. And so in most cases, my experience from doing rural delivery is around getting that housing needs study done first and really understanding what the needs are in that place, and therefore what mix of housing you might want to see. Where we do have some market housing on rural exception sites, we will need to take that into consideration through a viability assessment as to how much grant is needed. But I know we've got unknown user there, but I've put my email into the chat, and if you want to talk more specifically specifically about that, then do email me and I'll put you in touch with the right growth manager. We have a rural expert in each of our teams across the country, so I can make sure that I put you in touch with the right rural lead who can help with that.
That's great, thank you, Helen. And I'm getting frantic messages to say I've gone over time, so I'm sorry everybody that we didn't get to all your questions.
I'll just say thank you again to our amazing speakers, Helen and Steve, and thanks to you all for attending and engaging so well. Thank you and goodbye.